Some places carry a kind of silence that feels heavier than it should, not because nothing is happening, but because too much has already happened there. The shelter sat at the edge of the city, where the noise faded just enough for small sounds to stand out, the distant clanging of metal gates, the low murmur of voices, the occasional bark that echoed longer than it should. Most people who walked in already knew what they were looking for: a friendly face, a calm tail wag, something easy. But not every story begins that way. Some begin in the cages people walk past, the ones they don't stop at, the ones they are quietly told to avoid. And sometimes, those are the stories that take the longest to be seen. The corridor wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. A mix of sounds lingered in the air: paws shifting against metal floors, low barks, the occasional sharp clang when a gate was closed too quickly. Most of the cages held movement: dogs stepping forward, ears lifting, tails wagging in hopeful rhythm. They reacted the moment someone walked by, as if every passing shadow could be the one. But at the far end of the corridor, there was a cage that felt different. It wasn't empty, but it felt like it was. The dog inside didn't come forward. He stayed in the back corner, his body still, his posture tight but not aggressive in the way people expected. It wasn't anger, it was distance. His fur was uneven, slightly rough in places, as if time had worn it down. One ear twitched occasionally, picking up sounds long before they reached the rest of him. But he didn't move toward them. He didn't ask. People noticed the cage, but only for a second. Then they moved on. Sometimes, someone would slow down just enough to read the small sign attached to the metal bars. A few words. Simple. Direct. Use caution. That was enough. They didn't need to see more, didn't need to know more, because caution usually means one thing: trouble. And people don't come to shelters looking for trouble. They come looking for something easy to love, something that loves them back, immediately. Not something that hesitates, not something that steps back instead of forward. So they passed, one after another, day after day, and the dog remained exactly where he was, not because he didn't notice them, but because he had already learned something they hadn't. Some connections don't come when you step forward, and some don't come at all. He hadn't planned to stay long. That was the first thing. People who come with certainty move differently. They walk with direction. They already know what they want. But he didn't. He moved slowly through the corridor, stopping briefly at a few cages, offering a soft glance, a small nod, sometimes a quiet word, not searching, just looking, as if he was waiting for something to feel right. Or maybe something to feel anything at all. He reached the end of the row without realizing it, and that's when he noticed the cage, not because it stood out, but because it didn't. There was no movement, no sound, just stillness. He paused. Not long, just enough. Most people would have moved on, but he didn't. His eyes stayed there a little longer than necessary, and in that extra moment, something shifted. The dog lifted his head slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge that someone was there. Their eyes met, briefly. Then the dog looked away, not in fear, not in aggression, just absence. That was the part that stayed with him. It wasn't anger, it wasn't threat, it was distance, a kind of distance that doesn't ask to be closed. And yet, he didn't step away. You might want to be careful around that one. The voice was calm, not urgent, but certain. He turned slightly, noticing one of the staff members standing a few steps behind him. There was no judgment in their tone, no pressure, just experience. He doesn't do well with people, they continued. The man glanced back at the cage. The dog hadn't moved, still in the same position, still watching, but not directly. What do you mean? He asked quietly. The staff member hesitated for a moment, as if choosing words that had already been used too many times. He reacts, they said, sometimes quickly, sometimes without warning. A pause. We've had a few incidents. The man nodded slightly, not surprised, not dismissive, just listening. He's been here a while, the staff member added. No one's really been able to work with him. There was something in that sentence, something unspoken, not just about the dog, but about everything that had already been tried, and maybe everything that had been given up on. The man looked back again, longer this time. The dog shifted slightly, not forward, just adjusting. as if preparing for something that might not happen. People usually don't choose him, the staff member said softly. It wasn't said as a fact. It was said like something that had been repeated enough times to become truth. The man didn't respond immediately. He didn't step closer, didn't reach out. He just stood there, quiet, present. And then, almost to himself, he said, maybe no one really tried to understand him. The staff member didn't answer, because sometimes there isn't an easy response to that. He didn't move closer right away. That was the first difference. Most people, when they feel unsure, either step back or try to fix the moment too quickly. He did neither. He stayed where he was, not close enough to invade the dog's space, not far enough to disappear, just there. The kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention, but doesn't avoid it either. The dog noticed, not in an obvious way. There was no sudden reaction, no sharp movement, just a small shift, a tightening of the body, a slight change in the way he held his head. He was aware now, fully. The man lowered himself slowly, resting on his heels instead of standing over him. It made the space feel different. Less pressure, less expectation. He didn't reach out, didn't speak much, just a quiet breath. And then, a simple gesture. He placed his hand lightly on the ground, outside the cage, not offering it, not pushing it forward, just letting it exist there. Time passed, not seconds, longer, the kind of time people usually don't give. The dog watched, carefully. His eyes moved between the hand and the man's face, trying to understand something that didn't feel familiar. There was no force, no sudden energy, no demand, and that was new. Most interactions he had known carried urgency, movement, noise, something that felt like it needed to happen quickly. This didn't. This stayed still. The dog shifted slightly, one paw forward, then stopped, as if testing whether the world would react. It didn't. The man remained exactly the same, and in that stillness something softened, just a little, not enough to trust, but enough to pause. It wasn't a connection yet, but it was the first moment that didn't feel like a threat. He came back the next day, and the day after that, not at the same exact time, but close enough for a pattern to form. At first, nothing changed. The dog stayed in the corner, watched, waited, held on to that distance like it was the only thing keeping him safe. And maybe it was. The man didn't try to rush it. He didn't expect something new each day. He understood something most people don't. Progress doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like the absence of fear. On the third visit, the dog didn't turn his head away immediately. On the fifth, he stayed facing forward a little longer. On the seventh, he stood up. Not to come closer, just to stand. It was small, almost nothing. But it wasn't nothing. The staff noticed, quietly. They didn't say much, but they saw it. The difference. Subtle, but there. "He's calmer when you're here," one of them said one afternoon. The man nodded. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate, because he knew something they also knew. Calm doesn't always mean trust. It just means less fear. And fear doesn't disappear quickly. It lingers. It hides. It waits. So he kept doing the same thing. Showing up. Sitting. Waiting. No sudden moves. No expectations. Just time. Time that stretched slowly between them. Time that, little by little, began to change something neither of them could fully see yet. It happened on a day that felt no different from the others. Same corridor. Same quiet rhythm. Same stillness. The man had taken his usual place outside the cage, lowered. Calm. The dog was closer than before, not by much, but enough to feel like something had shifted. There was a moment where everything felt almost steady, and then it changed, quickly, without warning. The dog lunged forward, a sharp movement, a low, deep growl cutting through the silence, his body tense, eyes wide, not angry, but overwhelmed. The man instinctively leaned back, not far, just enough to create space. His hand moved slightly off the ground. His breathing changed. Faster. The room reacted. A staff member stepped forward immediately. "Hey, back up," they said, firm but controlled. The moment tightened. Everything felt fragile again, like something that had taken days to build had been undone in seconds. The dog retreated just as quickly, back into the corner, breathing hard. eyes darting, confused, not just by the man but by himself. Silence followed, heavy, uncomfortable, the kind that makes people step away. The staff looked at the man. "We told you," they said softly. Not harsh, not blaming, just honest. The man didn't answer right away. He looked at the dog, still shaking slightly, still unsure, still afraid. And then he did something unexpected. He didn't leave, because sometimes the moment things break is the moment they begin to matter. He stayed a little longer that day, not as close, not as still, but still there. The dog didn't come forward again, didn't move much at all, but he watched, carefully, as if trying to understand why the man hadn't disappeared, because that's what usually happened. People left when things became difficult, when reactions didn't match expectations, when fear showed itself too clearly. They stepped away and didn't come back. But this time, nothing about the man's presence suggested he was done. The next day he returned. The staff noticed. They didn't say anything this time, just watched, from a distance. The man took his place again, not pushing closer, not pretending nothing had happened, just adjusting, giving space, letting the moment settle instead of forcing it to be forgotten. The dog stayed in the corner longer than before, more guarded now, more unsure, but he didn't turn away completely. That was the difference. He still watched, still followed the man's movement with his eyes, still stayed aware. Days passed like this, slower than before, quieter, more fragile, but something was still there. Not trust, not yet, but not absence either. And sometimes that's enough to begin again, because trust isn't built by perfect moments. It's built by staying after the broken ones. The change didn't happen all at once. It rarely does. There was no single moment where everything suddenly became easy. No instant shift where fear disappeared and trust took its place. It was quieter than that, almost easy to miss. On one of the mornings, the man sat the same way he always did, a little distance away, his posture relaxed, his presence steady. Nothing new, nothing forced. The dog was already watching him. That had become normal now, not with tension the way it used to be, but with something closer to awareness. There was less stiffness in his body, less urgency in his breathing, still cautious but not completely closed. The man reached into his pocket slowly, the same motion he had repeated many times before, a small piece of food. He placed it gently on the ground, not too close, never too close. And then he waited. He always waited. The dog looked at it, then at him, then back again. Something in that moment felt different. There was hesitation, but it wasn't the same kind as before. This hesitation wasn't about fear alone. It was about choice. A quiet decision forming. He stepped forward, slowly. One step, then another. He stopped halfway, looked again. Nothing changed. No sudden movement. No pressure. Just the same calm presence. And then, he closed the distance. Not fully, but closer than he had ever been before. He lowered his head slightly, carefully picked up the food, and for the first time he didn't rush back. He stayed there for a moment, standing, close. The man didn't reach out, didn't try to touch him, didn't break the moment, because some moments only exist if you don't interrupt them. The dog lifted his head again. Their eyes met, and this time he didn't look away immediately. It wasn't trust, not completely, but it wasn't fear either. It was something in between, something new, something that had taken time to reach this point, and something that could still disappear if rushed. So the man stayed still, and the dog stayed too. It wasn't the end of the distance, but it was the first time it felt like it could be crossed. The conversation happened quietly, away from the noise, away from the cages. The staff member stood across from them, arms loosely folded, expression thoughtful but cautious. "You've been coming here a while," they said. The man nodded. "He's different with you," they added. A pause. "But that doesn't change everything." The man understood what they meant. Behavior in a controlled space is not the same as life outside it. A dog can feel safe in a routine and still struggle when that routine changes. "He's not an easy case," the staff continued. "Even now, there's no guarantee." There was no fear in their voice, just honesty, the kind that comes from experience. The man looked back toward the corridor, toward the cage. Even from a distance, he could see him, sitting the same way, watching. not calling out, not demanding anything, just there. Most people wouldn't take that risk, the staff said softly. He nodded again. I know. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind where the decision is already made, but hasn't been spoken yet. He doesn't need someone who's not afraid, the man said finally. He needs someone who understands why he is. The staff member didn't respond right away, because there wasn't much to say to that. Some decisions don't come from logic alone. They come from something quieter, something that builds over time. And when it's there, it doesn't leave much room for doubt. You're sure? They asked. The man looked back one last time. At the dog. At the distance that still existed but no longer felt impossible. And then he said, yes. Some choices don't feel safe, but they feel right. The day he left the shelter, nothing about it felt certain. The world outside was bigger, louder, less predictable. Every sound carried further. Every movement felt sharper. The dog walked carefully, each step measured, not pulling forward, not resisting, just trying to understand where he was. The leash stayed loose. The man didn't guide him too tightly, didn't rush him forward. He let him take his time. Let him pause when he needed to. Let him look, listen, adjust. The car was unfamiliar. The space inside it confined in a different way, but quieter, safer. The dog stayed still most of the drive, eyes open, taking everything in. Not panicking, but not relaxed either. Some transitions don't feel like relief. They feel like uncertainty. And that's okay, because change doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes, it just feels different. And different can be the beginning of something better. The house was quiet, not silent, but calm in a way the shelter never was. No constant movement, no overlapping sounds, just space and stillness. The dog stepped inside slowly, paused near the doorway, as if deciding whether this was temporary or something else. The man didn't push him forward, just walked in and waited, giving him room. The dog moved carefully through the space, sniffing, stopping, listening. Everything was new, but nothing felt threatening. Not immediately. That mattered. The first night was the hardest. Sleep didn't come easily. Every small sound carried weight. Every shift in the room felt important. The dog stayed alert, awake longer than he needed to be. Watching, waiting. But the man didn't force anything, didn't expect calm right away. He sat nearby, not too close, just enough. A quiet presence, the kind that had started all of this. And slowly, over time, that presence became familiar. Because sometimes, safety isn't a place, it's a feeling that takes time to grow. It didn't happen overnight. There was no single day where everything changed completely, no moment where fear disappeared for good. But something did change. Slowly, steadily, in small ways. The dog began to rest more, not out of exhaustion, but because he felt safe enough to. His breathing softened. His movements slowed. The tension that once held his body tight began to loosen. He followed the man more often now. Not closely, not constantly, but enough to show something had shifted. There were moments, quiet ones, where he would sit nearby, not asking for anything, just choosing to stay. And that was enough, more than enough, because trust doesn't always look like affection. Sometimes it looks like presence, like staying, like no longer needing to keep distance. The world outside didn't change. People still passed. Life still moved. But for him, something had settled. Something that had been missing for a long time. He wasn't the aggressive dog anymore, not because he had changed completely, but because someone had finally seen him differently. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Some stories don't change the world overnight, but they change something quietly inside us. He was never a dangerous dog. He was just a dog who had learned to be careful for too long. And maybe that's something we forget sometimes. Not everything that looks difficult is broken. Some things just haven't been understood yet. If you've ever believed in giving someone or something a second chance, you probably felt this story a little differently. And if that's true, just let it stay with you for a moment. Maybe share it with someone who would understand it too. And if you'd like to hear more quiet stories like this, you already know what to do.